All right, so my name is Brendon Livingstone. I'm joined today by Bill Ross, Herman, Van Krieken, and Peter Smeaton. We all work at Equinox IT, providing IT consulting, software development, and IT training services in New Zealand. And on the Blab today, we're going to be talking about exploring DevOps and Bimodal IT in a New Zealand IT context. And the first question is, what does DevOps mean in a New Zealand context? And I'll hand it over to you, guys.
Right. Okay. I think actually, for smaller companies in New Zealand, DevOps is almost a natural way of operating. Because they haven't got any choice. They haven't got separated development and operations teams. Small startups, small companies, they sort of just operate in that way, and probably have for a long time, but maybe didn't even have the name. It didn't associate the name DevOps with it. I don't know what you guys think of that situation.
Well, actually, I disagree. There are plenty of large organizations that do have very separate organizational structures that do operate in a more traditional way, and it would be very good for them to move into this DevOps principle to remove all the waste that goes on between development operations and all the unwritten expectations that happen when they throw things over the fence to all of a sudden become productionized.
Yeah, I think my comment was to do with small companies, as but you're right. I agree. The larger ones adopt this traditional separation of development and operations, and where that comes from. Originally, I don't know. Thinking of like textbooks I did when I was doing my degree. Textbooks, IT textbooks on IT management. They said, "Oh, this is the way you structure an IT department. You have, these separate areas called development and operations." And everyone said, "Oh, yes, okay, that's the way it's done. That's always the way it's been done. So be it." And it's interesting. It's really being challenged, now. What's driving that challenge to that sort of traditional structure?
Yeah, and it's all underpinned by a whole bunch of technology development that makes it all possible to all of a sudden sit side by side and do seamless handovers and do continuous development and create a pipeline of delivery. That's all the outcomes that organizations will get from that, and as a result, quality goes up. As a result, the reduction of frustration in end users is greatly reduced.
Yeah, but only if it's done well.
Sure.
And I'm not sure actually it's not necessarily the technology that's driving it. It's probably that separation, I think, used to exist because of complexity. It couldn't be trusted that you could easily, deploy something without a lot of configuration and the complexity of configuring and deployment and data migration and setup and all that stuff that goes on. I agree that some of the automation technologies have made that, easier. But setting up that automation, in your organisation is, considerable effort, and it's not sort of something you can just move to. It's sort of something I think you migrate to as you move that, that deployment pipeline. You sort of move it closer and closer to the actual live system, and add the automation over time. It's quite a journey, I think, for any organisation that's going from the traditional structure to move to a real, true DevOps operation.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is not a trivial thing to do, but it's got to be driven by the need to reduce waste in the organization, and it has to be supported fully by the management team and the executive to be able to get there, because it also requires investment, and the investment will take time to return the value back to the organization. But once it's done, it becomes a very valuable tool to fend off any competitive activities if they are sort of in that sort of game. And although government is obviously not, so the public sector is not in a competitive game, but they could gain significantly from doing something like this and investing in returning better quality services to the public at large.
I'd like to separate DevOps from speed of deployment. If I go back to my early experience in IT, then partly to do with the scale of the organisations that I worked for, but I think it was also just more common at the time. DevOps was a thing. It was what you did. You analysed a business area. You often wrote the code or had a high level of involvement in the code, and you saw it into production. And you were the one on the end of the cell phone when the batch failed at 11 o'clock or whatever. But that didn't correlate with a particularly fast change cycle. But nevertheless, there was no formal separation between build and run, if you like. There were still advantages from that, because it meant that the people that were on the operations side had a deep knowledge of the software and so on. So I think there were advantages without the fast cycle times, which is something else, which was the continuous deployment and the agile aspect. That's relatively new, at least in my experience.
Yeah, that's a good point, Peter.
I think these are all separate things, and they can be considered separately, but then they can play together.
Yeah. So we have, the question talks about the New Zealand context. Do you think there's a between what we're looking at here in New Zealand with DevOps and what other locations maybe?
Yeah, I think like in organisations that are, their business is technology. I guess the Googles and the Amazons of the world. They they experiment essentially in real time through A/B tests and other approaches. It's intrinsic to what they do. Other organisations, techniques like that just aren't necessarily useful. And maybe Herman mentioned government departments. They're probably not in that situation of wanting to run experiments on their client base to see what they favour, although they potentially could. But it's more, I guess, delivering effective value to the to the stakeholders. And I think that the key thing is quick feedback cycles, and being able to deliver value quicker, but it's probably much more incremental as opposed to big bang deliveries of major releases. You're able to do more frequent but smaller value is deployed. And I guess there's certain bottlenecks that have always existed. Testing is a classic example. A regression test of a system, that in a big complex system that could be many weeks of work. And that's a transaction cost, if you like, especially if it's done manually. It's a transaction cost of putting out a new release. But some of these technologies allow you to reduce those transaction costs, automated testing, etc., to much smaller levels. And that's probably the key to it, is with reduction of the release transaction cost activities. So that we can be tested overnight automatically, and a lot of things come together from unit testing at the lowest level, integration testing, automated performance testing, and so on and so forth, that are the underpinnings of the ability to do this stuff.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and that's what I've tried to mention, and probably didn't do so well in my first comment, is that the application of tools to underpin DevOps have made it possible to do some of the individual steps in the whole DevOps definition in a much more automated way, which make it more reliable, more repeatable, more automated, if you like, end to end. And as such, the speed of delivery gets greatly enhanced. It means the work packages or the changes can happen more frequently. That means the risk is reduced as a result also. So all that together, it makes this whole DevOps principle pretty much worthwhile to look into, I would suggest.
And I think an important aspect to it is the project approach to especially new software. When maybe it's not because a project that's releasing a new system, especially if it's a big bang release of a new system, they're not necessarily the way you judge projects through do they deliver on time and scope and budget, etc., often doesn't mean that the project gets an advantage by making the investment in that sort of automation, because once it sort of leaves the project, then it's in another world. The operations business as usual world, and that's often where the pain occurs. And my general sort of wisdom is that most money spent on any application is actually spent on it after it goes live. But there's so much emphasis on the project that maybe you're better thinking of almost dropping the project concept and thinking that the whole thing is a factory, and all the early iterations are the early part of business as usual. But you want to build assets, those sort of things we spoke about earlier, that are basically going to give you a payback over the complete life of the application.
I agree with that. I think the project approach historically needs to change to smaller increments. The minimal viable product concept that you see in the lean architecture world is probably a much better way to do it, and using DevOps to deploy that is a much better way of looking at the minimal parts and then following on then all the features or changes that you may want to make going forward. So DevOps on its own is probably not so wonderful, but if you take it into context with all the other lean principles, it becomes a very, very powerful tool to help the technology departments deliver value.
Just going back to what Bill said, I agree, Herman. But Bill, you talked about almost not wanting projects, or looked at the sort of destructive or the negative elements of projects around scope. So there's that whole thing that the project de-scopes, or does things to get over the line, and then it's over the line, and then it's ops problem. Yeah. But if you take up a more holistic view from an organizational total sort of lifetime cost, it's disadvantageous probably. And so, I mean, you either change that, you either sort of, move to a way which gets rid of projects and replaces them with some other construct, as per what Herman was saying, a more incremental approach, or maybe you change the scope of a project so that it fundamentally must be not just delivered and posted through the slot, but actually in production, with a fully operational environment. You change that scope so that it's in the project's interests to deliver a complete thing.
Yeah, no, you couldn't agree more.
So is now an opportune time to move on to the next question?
Yeah.
Yep. So next one we've got here, what does bimodal IT mean in a New Zealand context?
What does it mean in any context?
Yes. I mean, this is, I understand, a term that Gartner dreamed up or come up with, and this idea of basically you split your IT department in two effectively. One using the traditional approach, meaning that it's going to be it's going to change slowly. It's a system of record, has to be super accurate, etc., which is in the mode 1 they talk about, and the mode 2 is your sexy new mobile, fast moving part of IT. And I don't know whether it actually helps the organisation, apart from maybe separating a split down the how do you decide which side things are in for one point, and there's also these massive interdependencies often between the sorts of things you want to do in the sort of mode 2 space and what's needed to be happening in the mode 1 space to support that stuff. So and it sort of doesn't say how does it develop over time. I know. It could be a temporary situation as you try to deal with the demands of the sort of or the expectations that people have with mobile applications, etc., in mode 2 space. But you don't want to I don't think you'd want your IT organisation to have that sort of bimodal, or I'd almost call it bipolar, structure, going forward.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I have a feeling that if an organization is purely and only in mode 1, they're going to be overtaken by competition and become irrelevant very quickly, because this world is about speed to react to the market. That is today's world. What is going to happen tomorrow, we all don't know, because it's such a fast-moving beast. But being in mode 1 only, or having a mode 1 piece of an organization, seems so much overkill, and it seems to me a sure way to fail.
Yeah, I agree. I think, bimodal is definitely what is out there. I see a lot of it. I see core systems, which are the systems of record, as you said, Bill, and then they're surrounded by other bits that are maybe the systems of interaction or customer engagement or whatever you want to call it. But then often there's a handoff, there's a disjunction between those two where it's all good, you get this lovely interactive thing going on, and then at some point we come to a screeching halt, and in fact you get a paper form to fill in, and you scan that and send that as an email or something, and then it gets picked up internally and popped into the system of record. So you sort of get things like that going on, and I think that's good enough for now for some organisations, but in a competitive situation, those organisations that have digitised their core are going to have an advantage. They're going to be able to offer. They're going to offer a seamless end-to-end transaction, a deep transaction, and I think that's powerful and important.
Yeah,
and bimodal seems to, doesn't seem to acknowledge that, or.
Well, I think what they need to acknowledge in there more is that bimodal is a transitional state that an organisation will live in for a while until they're fully adopted the digital world and become an agile organisation through and through, so that they can compete in this world. It's the only way to survive, really.
Yeah. I don't know why Gartner. I mean, I'm not sure how they pitch it exactly, but to pitch it as a way of it's a categorization, which is true. You could take over an organization and categorize their systems into mode 1 and mode 2. That's fine, but it's not a desirable place to be. And ideally, all your systems would be mode 1 type, operating, and that would be ideally where you're moving. Unfortunately, over time, if you set up the sort of recognition of a mode 1 and mode 2, the problem would be that over time your mode 1 grows bigger as things that are developed in mode 2. They in 5 years' time, are they going to be then sitting in mode 1? And all that happens is your mode 1 space gets bigger. With where you want actually the reverse to occur, you want to be moving things out of mode 1 into mode 2, and that's going to require active projects, active investments, and all the rest of it.
I agree completely. You look at an outfit and like a Netflix, for example. I know it's easy to pick those internet those ones, but can you imagine that being viable with a chunk of it being mode 2? A chunk of it being mode 1. Yeah. I mean, what they've essentially got is the deep properties of mode 1, in the sense that they've got something that's super reliable, high availability, high resilience, all those things. And in fact, they're doing that chaos monkey thing to constantly push the system and test it. But at the same time, it's clear that they're able to be very agile, and they're able to introduce things and change, respond to business changes. So it's the best of both.
Yep.
And I think that really should be the objective.
I guess being devil's advocate a little bit here, and again in a New Zealand context, is it more practical to take this approach though? When we see organisations who are adopting approaches such as SAFe, probably more so than something like less. And is that partly because they can make that happen more easily without significant change to their organisation, because it's SAFe seems to work more well in the existing structures of an organisation compared to less, which is moving quite a lot more to a pure Scrum approach on an enterprise scale. Is bimodal a pragmatic approach for New Zealand organisations?
That's a good question, Brendon. And how the position of like the SAFe agile framework against the less agile framework. I'd say that from my reading of it, a large organisations with a commitment or a large investment in traditional type applications that are sort of living in the mode 1 space, you probably find the SAFe framework for doing agile development, should I say, safe, and that they can map it seems to map almost to their existing structures. There's a lot of roles in SAFE that people can, enterprise architects, there's systems architects, there's portfolios of projects and all that stuff. You can sort of say, oh yes, it's sort of just it looks pretty similar. And there's the Scrum part, and SAFE sort of sits down in the bottom left-hand corner, sort of happens at the bottom level, tucked away. Whereas less is more radical, but I'd say if done well, probably actually make the organisation really more agile, because effectively it does try to form very close linkages at the top level of the organisation. The executive management, the marketplace they're working in, the demands for the organisation and the environment, and it tries to make very close connections between that at the top and the actual Scrum teams doing the work, if you like, at the bottom, for lack of a better term, but the actual doers, with not a lot of disintermediation occurring. They try to basically short circuit what used to be the realm of middle managers and coordinators and all that. But when you look at the SAFE framework, you do tend to see a lot of these intermediary roles, which sits between that connection of the of the executives and the demand of the organisation at the top and the doers, people doing the work at the bottom. So yeah, it's a real spectrum. But I wonder whether maybe going straight to a less type structure in an organisation could be quite a radical change. And how you would implement it, I don't know. And possibly SAFE could be a stepping stone, if you like, from going from really traditional, go to SAFE, and then ultimately move to something more like less.
But pulling us back to bimodal, isn't it the same kind of argument? Like, you could see that it could be attractive to organisations, even
as a
if
transition.
It's not, possibly as a transition, even if it's not necessarily the right thing for them to get the ultimate prize, if you like. You can see that it could be attractive to some organisations.
Well, at least it explicitly acknowledges the need for velocity in part of the organisation's IT.
Yeah, I was wondering about the while Bill was talking about the composition of IT teams throughout sort of the New Zealand landscape, and you look at that and you say, well, a lot of the practitioners are of an age that were grown up in traditional activities, and it will be hard, although IT is sort of all about changing the business and changing technology and introducing new stuff. Changing selves is kind of difficult, and people find it very hard to move away from the traditional techniques and methods and structures into an agile environment, whether it's SAFE or whether it's less. It doesn't matter. It'll be changing themselves and reinventing ourselves, if you like, will be a difficult task until such time that the Z generation is starting to make really its way into this industry and are expecting to see just mode 2.
Sure.
You with me?
Yeah. And I think you're right. There is that sort of, that concept of the book Management 3.0, and it talks about I guess your first Management 1.0 was effectively your classic command and control and coordination, top-down stuff, which you're all sort of familiar with. Version 2, it talks about essentially, when things got harder, it was basically model 1 of, or version 1 of management, but just work harder and work longer, and more control and more coordination was sort of pushed down, trying to deal with the environment. And now we've got version 3, which basically is this idea of mixed team, multidisciplinary, self-managing teams. And that sort of ties in. It's so important, that sort of a concept and the values like that, tying in, to doing agile effectively in the organisation. And reinventing would point. I think the term there, reinventing ourselves. Those of us who've maybe been in the industry a while, looking through all this information on these topics and trying to sort out the wheat from the chaff, and how to pragmatically, apply it, is a big part of the rails we find ourselves in.
Well, it's interesting. I mentioned this because in a couple of my clients that I've serviced over the past, it was very clear that the Z generation is trying to push for these new methodologies. They're expecting it to be there, and they're expecting everybody to understand it. Yet the older generation, sort of my generation, I guess, is resisting that because it is a change, and it is kind of how do we accept that it is necessary to move from mode 1 to mode 2, going into a DevOps sort of state, really changing our ways, if you like. And again, I'll use the word reinvent, and maybe that's what this is all about. The older generation needs to give up their own values and start thinking in a lean way, I guess.
So, Herman, you introduced DevOps back again there, and so that's probably a good point for me to move on to the next question, which is how do DevOps and bimodal IT play together?
I don't know that they are necessarily related, and I don't know that DevOps and bimodal are necessarily even related to Agile or Lean. They can be, and it's. I guess it's. I mean, I'm just putting this up as a thought.
Yeah.
Thought. I think you can have any one of these things without the other, but to get an end-to-end the release pipeline going, which has got faster and more responsive, and as you said at one point, Herman, lower risk because the delivery increments are so much smaller. Then you have to bring all these pieces together. Probably not bimodal though. Bimodal's the Gartner thing. It's not one of the. I don't see it as one of the solution.
Yeah. But bimodal is getting traction, so I don't know. So.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think you got to treat. I think there's certainly an affinity between Mode 2 and DevOps.
Yes.
Yes. Close affinity,
yes.
And I think all really, to my mind, Mode 1 and Mode 2 is just a categorization. But then if you want to use that categorization then to manage or structure your IT department, that's where I think it gets risky. It's just a recognition of these categories of system types. And the ideal should be trying to move from a Mode 1 type situation to a Mode 2 situation. I think as we've discussed already. So it's so they are sort of related as opposed to unrelated. But I think this how agile thinking is essentially cultural. As you're saying, the reinventing and the rethinking of approaches. But I think it's also tied in though to some pretty robust theory, like theory of constraints, the idea of optimizing the whole as opposed to optimizing the parts.
Yes.
So from those of us who are maybe more older and like to see evidence and theory backed up with actual validated theory, some of the the thinking behind it actually is quite valid. Coming from even the Toyota lean manufacturing and lean product development, which goes right back to the 1930s actually. And actually, I think the big thing is the realization that these techniques that aren't actually that new actually have applicability, in an IT department. And understanding how you translate those ideas to work in an IT department, which is really interesting.
Yeah, some of the literature that I've been reading up on is certainly agreeing with those comments. The Phoenix project is a more recent one of those, but other documents are really clear that the Toyota solution on improving their production has been absolutely mind-boggling and trend-setting, and still is today. So it's fantastic. So how did the two relate, Brendon? Well, it's already been mentioned. Mode 2 and DevOps certainly have a strong relationship. Mode 1, that's the old way. Yeah, no relationship, I don't think.
Sure. All right, so we'll move on to the final question then. How do New Zealand organisations maximise the opportunities from DevOps and bimodal IT?
I'd say come and talk to us, we can help.
Yeah, okay. Putting that blatant plug aside.
Yeah. Cut to the chase, Herman.
Yeah.
As always.
Yeah. Hey. I think the key thing is, I think the mode 1, mode 2 model is useful in recognizing and maybe helping people understand the IT department, and setting mode 2 as a desired state to move to, and as part of that, having a robust DevOps capability to be able to move from mode 1 to mode 2.
Yeah.
So I think it gives people a framework, and to say, okay, in I don't know, 3 years time or whatever their objective is, can we be essentially a mode 2 operation, and set that as almost an aspirational place to be? Because I think the advantages of being able to operate in that sort of agile capability and be optimized, globally optimized, to deliver the most value as quickly as you can for the whole organization is an admirable objective, as opposed to just trying to be the most efficient IT department, or to just be or the most just keep costs down, which often is an emphasis, because so many, I think, organizations have so much they have to spend so much every year to keep their mode 1 systems running. And it's like going tramping and putting rocks in your pack, it slows you down, and you've got less and less money available to do the mode 2 type stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, my feeling is that I definitely see some organisations that are doing what you just said, Bill. They're essentially transitioning everything towards the responsive and fast turnaround end of the spectrum, to the mode 2 stuff, if you like, but making that the system of record, doing that end-to-end thing. But that's an ongoing journey for an organisation, and they've got to stay sharp around, they've got to address the technical debt and the types of things, that sort of the fluff that builds up in systems, and they've got to do that actively. Whereas, again, not naming any names or anything, but my experience is that there are a lot of organisations that are going the other direction. Essentially, it's an accretive effect around their mode 1 systems. Something comes in, and at one point it's fast and responsive, but then at some point it sort of gets added and stabilised, or becomes, people move on, stuff changes, and then it becomes brittle, and you put a wrapper around it, you don't touch it, and it stopped being able to be responsive, or it just becomes an overhead and adds to the dog pile.
It's almost like, Peter, it's like a comfort zone, isn't it?
And then as Bill says, the resources spent on standing still just keep on going up.
And somehow, and I think Bill is right, as a framework, it would be great to have that as a plotted journey from today till tomorrow, that says, well, we want to be a mode 1, or from a mode 1 to a mode 2, and in 3 years we'll be there, and here are the things we need to do to get there. And that would be ideal. But I don't think there's many that will be actually really thinking that way just yet.
Well, for some commercial outfits, where it's just an imperative, and they, depending on their market and their positioning and so on. I mean, there are commercial organisations where that's probably not a big deal quite yet, but there are some that have already died because they haven't competed, exactly, as you said, and there are many others for whom where they've got to make that shift sooner rather than later. But there are organisations where there is no commercial imperative, and where the benefits of moving at their core level to a mode 2 are quite different. Maybe they're not do or die.
No, the motivational factors for those organisations need to be cranked up into something that makes it worthwhile doing for them. Whether it is publicity or whether it is some other driver that who knows? So is it the relevant technologies? Yeah, absolutely. Is it something that we should be involved in? Absolutely. Is there something we could help these people wake up, these organizations wake up? I think everyone should. And as I said to begin with in this final question, we can help with those discussions by bringing out sort of Gartner material and showing the modes that exist, and maybe waking people up and saying, hey, you should really move from here to here because of these reasons.
Yeah,
see if. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think they were asleep. I think it's recognised actually, and the problem is known.
Hard to change.
But it's not an easy problem, because effectively, you've got these legacy systems that are very, very old, very complex. People don't understand them, but you can't take the risk of them, going down sometimes, for an hour, because they could be 24/7 systems or whatever. It's a very, very tough problem.
I think I agree, Bill, and I would just say that there are clearly a lot of the examples that we've picked around the Mode 2 organisations, the Facebooks, etc., they're brand new organisations. They've started that way. It's a completely different prospect for an organisation that's got IT systems 30 years or whatever it is. That's a much harder proposition.
And it's almost it's natural entropy problem, whereby systems, even if you don't touch them, suffer entropy just because of there aren't skills available to maintain it or whatever. And it is I think a recognised problem, and it's we sort of talk about moving systems from mode 1 to mode 2, but the architecture of those systems have to support that. To be able to do that sort of stuff, it has to be built for testability in mind, and to retrofit. It's almost impossible actually to retrofit like automated unit testing and stuff onto an application that wasn't built to easily support it.
That's if you've even got access to the source code.
That's even more scary.
Lots and lots of systems out there are off the shelf in one form or another, and you're not able to do anything to fix them at that level.
Yeah.
One of the things you said, Bill, organisations building their capability in DevOps to help them move towards a Mode 2 operation. What recommendations do you have for organisations that are looking to increase their capability in DevOps? Where do they start? What do they do?
Right. Okay. I think that book, Continuous Delivery, describes it well. It talks about basically the pipeline. And you essentially have to, they talk about from the time, in the ideal world, and the ideal DevOps world, from the time code is checked in, you have this automation around, automatically running a unit test, automatically creating, the deployment data, running test scripts, doing all the stuff to the point where it's actually at the other end of the pipeline. It's actually deployed into production and is ready to use.
Sure.
Now you can't. The only way you can, as I see it, is you can just have to essentially start at the beginning of that whole process and move the automation and the process, because there may be processes in there that are manual or only some person knows, and even before you can automate anything you need to really understand it, because you've got to, maybe it's documented, maybe it's not, but essentially you move the automation further and further along that pipeline, and it's gradually, it doesn't have to be overnight. But that's when you've got, I guess, the true DevOps pipeline. What happens from the time code is checked in, as a developer makes a change, to the time something is, deployed into production, ready to go, and I guess that ties into be able to move through that pipeline, if you like, smaller increments of business value, functionality or change, going through that pipeline at a very fast rate.
So time to value, if you like, from a business thing, a business idea, which is validated, to it's out there realizing value or not, and it might be an experimental sort of thing.
Sure.
If it realizes value, keep it. If it doesn't, change it. But your cycle time for that changes from 6 months or a year or whatever it is, to days or maybe at the higher end of the spectrum, weeks. But not much more than that.
So that covers off the process side of it. What about people structure side of it? Is there considerations there?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in the Mode 1 model, this pipeline isn't a pipeline. There's like stuff happening on one side of a wall, and
it's a wall.
On the other side, it's a wall. And they're saying, and the two sides may be optimized.
Like Pink Floyd's Wall.
Big wall. Yeah. So, and what happens is that the development try to optimize around doing development, and even worse than that. Well, not worse than that. You get even the disciplines within the project optimizing. The BAs optimizing what they do,
Sure.
the architects, developers, designers optimizing what they do, the testers optimizing around doing good testing, then the DevOps people, or the operations people rather, optimizing around what operations do. And for them to optimize in terms of just operations, it's more optimal for them to get fewer bigger releases. It's more, if we only have to do a release once every 6 months as opposed to once every month, that optimizes their resources. But what it's not doing is optimizing the flow of value through the whole thing, and that's where the DevOps comes in. So structurally, that's where the structure change has to occur. Not development and operations, but DevOps.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that.
You're starting to talk, lots of organizations who find them that they're completely separated physically. So there's a floor or an area of the building where ops is, or even a different building. Whereas you're probably talking co-location and cross-teaming, and eventually completely blurring the distinction.
Yeah, the collaboration down the toilet, right?
Well, it could even be different organizations, couldn't it, Peter?
Or sometimes it is. In the case of outsourcing and so on. So, with some of the arrangements that are in place around things like outsourcing, I don't know what the answer is there, because what you've put in place then is a whole set of legal structures, or contractual structures between the change and run.
And that's a difficult problem. But I think it comes down ultimately to trust. And if you could trust your vendor, your operations side, if they understand the way you want to operate and they buy into, a DevOps type of operation, a member of that team could be, on your site. And this really comes back to a lot of agile principles around, co-location, clear communication, the team, shared responsibility, and self-managing team, and all those sorts of things, and essentially trust. But contracts are interesting because often contracts are structured around the thing that you almost don't trust the other person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So. We're probably coming towards the end and time to close out. Is there any last comments from anyone on the call that you'd like to mention before we finalise this?
Yeah, I don't know. Herman mentioned a book. There's a couple of sort of like reference books and places where there's a lot of information happening in the space and worth reading. I think you mentioned the Phoenix Project. Was that Herman? You mentioned that. That's an interesting thing to read. I think another one is the Lean Startup, which is another a good thing to get a taste of the sort of leading edge in the space. I think I mentioned the book, the Continuous Delivery book. I can't remember the author's names, but that sort of goes into quite a bit of technical detail around how. Well, there you go. There's the Lean Startup.
The lean mindset.
Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting thinking, going on. I don't know if you guys got other references. Oh yeah, the lean mindset. There you go. So we've sort of been reading up and and researching and applying the stuff in a number of our projects and things we work on. But there's hundreds probably of books. But sifting through this and pulling out the gems and the key themes. Is there any other things you'd add, Peter? Any around things you've read or resources that you think are important in this space?
No, not specifically. I think it's just got to be. It's got to be a good thing to shorten cycle times and to essentially iterate. And if that has to be in a small part of an organisation, so be it. But if the organisation as a whole is to be responsive, then you need that digitisation to the core and the ability to iterate at a top level, at an organisational level.
Sure.
Right. I like that phrase. I think it's got to be good.
It's a long journey.
It's a long journey.
Yeah. And I like that phrase. What do you think? Digitisation to the core. I think we should patent that. I like it.
Anything more from you, Herman, before we close out?
No, thanks. I've already had my cheeky comment earlier.
All right. Well, then, thank you, everyone,
Thanks,
for
Cheers,
participating. It was a good discussion, and until next time, and I guess have a good Christmas and New Year and summer period, and we'll talk again next time.
Merry
Thanks,
Christmas.
Cheers.
Okay.
See you later. Bye.